Welcome to Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, where we talk about gospel insights through great stories and help you find entertainment that is both true and beautiful. Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree is part of the Public Square Media network of podcasts that seek to bring an LDS perspective into the public square. I'm your host, Carl Cranney. I have a PhD in religion, and I've written on the intersection of religious themes in pop culture, and I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And joining me, of course, as always, is my co-host, Liz.
Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Busby. I teach writing at BYU, and I study the intersection of religion and science fiction and fantasy.
And joining us today for the first time is Jacob.
Pleasure to be here. I'm Jacob Bender, PhD in English. I'm an assistant professor of English at Middlesex College in New Jersey. I'm also co-editor of Ships of Hagoth, the pop culture blog.
Adam is joining us for the second time. Adam, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
My pleasure, Carl. Thanks for having me. I am both a library director here in Beverly, New Jersey. I also serve as a classicist and Latin teacher at the Lawrenceville School. I taught for about 12 years Old Testament / Hebrew Bible at St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia. I have a BA in religion from Duke University, MDiv from Yale Divinity School, and a library science degree from Clarion University. I love all things LDS or Mormon. I'm not part of the Utah church, but I am part of a small, really teeny tiny restoration tradition called the Church of Jesus Christ with the Elijah Message. We also believe in the Book of Mormon, which we call the Record of the Nephites, the Bible, and then our own collection of revelations called the Word of the Lord. And currently live in South Jersey.
I'm in Central Jersey. This is the first time I've met another LDS academic in New Jersey in any way, shape, or form. So,
Have awesome. We got to connect afterwards.
I'm up in Edison. So we can meet up sometimes. It'll be a hike.
I was at a Pokemon convention in Edison.
Really?
A month ago.
Love doing this podcast.
Yeah, I met a lovely, absolutely lovely individual, the Black American guy from Stargate SG-1, Chris Judge, who played Teal'c. But he was there. There was a dancing Pikachu there. And the guy who sung the original Pokemon song, who's like super old now, he was there. But there were like literally thousands of people, and everybody was dressed up in Pokemon gear and everything. And it was really fun.
Oh, man.
See, this is why we invite people like you guys on. People like you are my people, like academic LDS people who want to come on a podcast and analyze TV and movie shows, but go to Pokemon conventions. I love running this podcast. We're glad, especially that Adam is here, because this is a little more of an interfaith sort of conversation this time, because today we'll be talking about The Good Place, a 4-season sitcom comedy series about the afterlife. It's currently available on Netflix until September 25th, and it seems likely, but not totally confirmed, to be headed towards Peacock after that. But first, we're going to do our best books segment, where we each recommend one thing we are watching, reading, or listening to. I've been reading the Assassin's Apprentice series by Robin Hobb. It's been quite fun. I noticed, Liz, when I went to put my review in on Goodreads, that you had read the first two and then bowed out and said, no, I don't like this anymore. I'm 2 books in and I'm going to finish it. So I think it's quite fun. It's a series about a young bastard nobleman who is trained in the various forms of magic that exist in this universe, but turns out that the best way he can serve the kingdom is by being an assassin, with all sort of the shenanigans that entails. Robin Hobb has created a really interesting low magic setting that I've enjoyed. The characters seem realistic to me, and I just enjoy seeing how all these different plot threads and the different ways that Fitzchivalry, the main character, his magic can enhance and sometimes hinder and sometimes help, and just the way it all comes together. It's been quite a delightful read for me. So I've enjoyed that quite a bit. Liz, what do you got for us this time?
My recommendation this time is a book I picked up over the summer, and it's really fun because you can just jump in, jump out of it pretty frequently. It's called The Notebook, A History of Thinking on Paper by Roland Allen. It's a nonfiction book, and it is literally the history of notebooks and how having a place to write your thoughts has impacted different people across time. So it starts out with notebooks being first available when paper became cheap in the Renaissance, and how that resulted in the invention of double book accounting, which is apparently what funded the Renaissance. And then, it goes through commonplace books, table books, the first iterations of like yearbooks, friendship books, and all the way through to things like bullet journals and Zettelkasten, which are new trends in thinking on paper. Anyway, I found it fascinating just thinking about all the different ways that writing impacts your ability to think about things. So it's really fun because each chapter is very self-contained. So you can just read like one short chapter and then be done for a while and then pick up another chapter, but they all are along the same themes. So that's The Notebook, A History of Thinking on Paper.
Interesting. I had a professor of mine who said, you haven't thought about something until you have written about it. And that assumes that you have the ability to write long things. And so that's an interesting subject to be studying. Adam, what do you have for us to recommend to our listeners this time?
Oh gosh, I'm a librarian, so there's so many books that come in and out of here all the time. But I think if I were to pick two, first one is this book called I Was Anastasia. As a history buff, as a history nerd, all I ever read is either Roman history or Russian history. And this book is about a woman, Anna Anderson, who claimed that she was Grand Duchess Anastasia from the time before the Russian Revolution, but it's a historical novel. So it gives kind of Anastasia's voice as she was a teenager, and then Anna Anderson's voice as an elder, and it alternates between the two. And then at the end is the bombshell as to whether or not she was the real Anastasia or not. But very entertaining, very well-written book. I haven't read a historical fiction book that good since Gore Vidal's Julian, way back when we were in divinity school, Carl. So that's one book I would highly recommend. The other, being an LDS nerd that I am, I recently got a gig reviewing books for Greg Cofford Book Publishing. So shout out, shameless promotion of Greg Cofford Books. And one of the books I had the opportunity to review was Elias by Orson Whitney, which is a very famous poem. And I've read it before. I love it, but then I read this critical edition and I fell in love with it even more. And I'm a really big fan of Dante, of Virgil. I have my students read Virgil in Latin 3, and this is like the LDS Virgil for me. It's an epic poem that touches on a lot of LDS theology and a lot of LDS themes. And yeah, I fell in love with it again while I had to recently review it.
That sounds fascinating. I saw your face light up, Liz, when he mentioned that. So
last summer, we did a book club, a couple of us, where we read all of the Mormon epic poems. So I read Elias. It's fantastic. There's a couple of other ones out there. Apparently Mormons like epic poetry. There's another one coming out this summer from University of Illinois Press, which I'm excited to read.
It's a shame more people don't. I feel like in LDS circles, we know about these guys, but the larger community doesn't. So I'm hoping that with this new critical edition of Elias, that'll kind of be a segue into the larger American literature, because it's definitely well-deserved.
all right, Jacob, what do you have to recommend to our listeners for this edition of our podcast?
Oh, let me also endorse the Aeneid. I teach that in my world literature class at Middlesex College and put in conversation with Dante and Homer. Each time I reread it, I fall in love with it a little more. I actually like the Aeneid better than the Iliad. Not better than the Odyssey,
I agree with
but better than the Iliad.
We are only 10 minutes in and we've gone from Pokemon to epic poetry. This is how we roll, people.
We contain multitudes.
Let me bring it back again to pop culture. Ships of Hagoth, the LDS essay blog site that I co-edit. We have an inadvertent focus on punk rock and an argument that LDS teens, in my experience, going back the last 20 or 30 years, have definite affinities for punk and indie that seems out of character on the surface, but given that both punk and Mormonism tend to work on American cultural margins, see why there's a definite affinities between the two. My most recent discovery, and I'm mad it took me so long to discover this, I'm originally from the Pacific Northwest. I'm from Washington State. I grew up about an hour from where Kurt Cobain was born. And I recently learned that the godmother of grunge was a woman named Tina Bell with a band named Bam Bam that started in 1983. Their roadie was Kurt Cobain. Their drummer went on to play for Soundgarden and Pearl Jam. But this band only put out like one 3-song EP and broke up and has never been heard and never got anywhere close to the same notoriety. When Kurt Cobain and Nirvana broke big, they were not one of the boats swept up in that rising tide. And it's frankly because Tina Bell was black. And, grunge is an overwhelmingly white scene, at least it was back in the 90s. And she has mostly been forgotten. She's been starting to get more crumbs of attention, at least since COVID ended. She passed away in 2012, but there have been tributes. There have been book chapters on her in the history of punk rock. Some of her music is starting to pop up on Bandcamp and Spotify again. And there's not much of it. And it makes me furious how little we get, because Bam Bam was friggin' awesome. Just her music makes me want to run through a friggin' brick wall. Pumps me up. Definitely look up Villains Also Wear White, that EP. Look up Bam Bam Home Demos 84, their only full-length release of sorts. Absolutely astronomical influence on not just the Seattle sound, but on pop culture in general, and undeservedly overlooked and ignored. We're going to have an essay about her on Chips of Hagoff in about a week or so. I'm mad that it took me so long to learn about her. I'm so mad that she's yet another example of a black woman who's been erased from pop cultural history. I'm mad that they didn't get to record more, because what they have was freaking awesome, even if we don't talk about influencer history. But yeah, somehow look up, again, she's not even streaming on Spotify right now, but somehow look up the works of Bam Bam and Tina Bell, because powerhouse vocals, the band around her could friggin' shred. That's what I'm listening to right now, and I'm reading the Mahabharata, longest epic ever written. It's from ancient India, and it contains the Bhagavad Gita. And it's going to take me at least 3 more years to finish it, but that's what I'm reading on my Kindle app on my phone.
Have you ever seen the TV show, The Mahabharata?
Oh, goodness, no. I'm a third of the way through, and I can't imagine it being adapted to anything I would want to watch. I'm forcing myself to read it, man. I'm forcing myself. I hope the TV show really boils it down to just the action scenes, because I spend a lot of time going, rich people fighting each other is just not very interesting. I think the reason the Bhagavad Gita really stands out is because it's a nice breather from all the endless rich people patting each other on the back and telling each other how awesome they are. So, oh, ye tiger among men. And like by the 100th time, I'm like, shut up. Get to the religious parts. Over this. Fortunately, the chapters are very short, and there's thousands of them, so it's going to take me a while. But yeah, that's just, I'm working my way through the works of Emanuel Swedenborg, because he always gets compared to Joseph Smith, and I want to actually know the original context. And that's what I'm reading right now.
We have a former guest on our podcast, Christian Swenson, who is starting his PhD at UC Berkeley, and he's going to be doing Swedenborgian Latter-day Saint comparison stuff. And so we look forward to Christian's future work on that.
Look forward to reading it.
Yeah. This may be the first time that we only talk about watching, reading, or listening to, and we kind of assume that listening to means audiobooks, but you're the first person who's like, no, we're going to go with grudge rock from the early 80s. Maybe we'll put that in our audio at the end of the episode, just for people to listen, to get a little taste of it. We'll see if we can find that. All right. Well, we will have links to all these recommendations on our website, popcultureapricottree.com. If you buy through these links, that helps support our podcast, so we can keep bringing you conversations about the true and the beautiful in pop culture. And now on to our main discussion of The Good Place. It's a fantastic little show, and I just kind of want to start by going around the horn and just getting everybody's sort of overall thoughts on the show. So let's start with you, Liz.
I love The Good Place. It's very fun. I am just a sucker for a quippy, fast dialogue, well-produced sitcom. So it's very fun. I rewatched a few episodes for this because it's been out for a while, and I had forgotten just like the sheer quantity of sex jokes in some of the episodes that I'm like, I have to be really careful that I'm like pausing whenever kids are walking by, because this is not content that's appropriate for a 9-year-old to hear even in passing. So it's one of those things where I really like this part of it. I really wish this part of it wasn't in, and it's a small part, and so I can put up with it. I really enjoy Eleanor and Chidi's relationship. I think they're awesome. They have a lot of on-screen chemistry, and I really rooted for them throughout the whole series.
Adam, why don't you give us your high-level thoughts about The Good Place?
Yeah, my wife was the one who introduced me to The Good Place because she knew my background in religious studies, and she was like, Adam, you've got to watch this show. It's like so philosophical, so theological. So I started to watch it with her. It was kind of our ritual. And we also started to listen to one of the podcasts that they had going on concurrently with the show. So the woman who plays Janet, Darcy Carden, she had a podcast where they would talk about themes in the show. So we really got into it. We watched every single episode whenever they came out. But I think the show went off the air in 2020. I haven't watched any episodes since then. But loved the show. Not the biggest fan of Kristen Bell, but I thought some of the other characters were amazing. I loved Ted Danson to begin with. I thought he was great as Michael. I honestly thought he was the most profound character on the show.
I like this new thing that happens. I did it with Shogun, where you can watch the show, but then they have a podcast about the making of. I didn't know they had done one with The Good Place. I loved and full spoilers ahead, everybody, right? We're in the conversation now. I did remember seeing on YouTube the video of the read through at the end of season 1, where they revealed that they've been in the bad place the whole time, and all of the actors reacting to finding out that their characters have been in the bad place the whole time was quite delightful. Jacob, what are some of your high-level thoughts about The Good Place?
Oh, my high-level takes are more low-level takes. The person who recommended it to me was a former roommate from Florida. So he recommended it not because it's, profoundly philosophical, but because he got all the Florida Man jokes with Jason from Jacksonville. He was just delighted that, of course, Florida Man went straight to hell. And when the first season was aired, the AV Club, which was a pop culture website I used to read pretty compulsively, was doing episode recaps. And while most of the reviews were very rave, they were really enjoying it. A lot of them were going, it's kind of annoying how they kind of have to beat the characters with the idiot stick. They set up these angels as being omniscient and all-powerful, but somehow they're making the stupidest mistakes. So when the big reveal came in the last 10 minutes of season 1 that they've been in the bad place the whole time, there was huge whiplash among all of these reviewers going, oh my gosh, they weren't being beat with the idiot stick. They actually knew what they were doing from the beginning. And it's, it really adds to the rewatch value of the first season because you can pick up all the finds now that you know to look for it. That's why I think this is one of the few shows that's okay to spoil because it actually enriches the rewatch instead of ruining it. I'd read No Exit by Jean-Paul Sartre in college like everyone does, and so I was fascinated by how they took a one-act play and basically made a 4-season TV show out of it, Hell is Other People. Because, of course, that's not what Jean-Paul Sartre actually believed. That's just what a character in a Sartre play says. But The Good Place commits whole hog to it, and it's one of those, once you know the twist, you even go, man, I should have seen it coming because this is just No Exit in sitcom form. Hell is Other People. Because when you're the sort of person who hates other people, when you're misanthropic to begin with, of course, hell is other people. And that's what really fascinated me about the show when I first watched it. And then, picking up other LDS connections as I went along, although I did that more for fun on my free time.
Sure. Yeah, I liked it. I always enjoy TV shows that have angels and demons, and the cosmology is vaguely monotheistic because I find they then have to wrestle with theological issues in how they create their world. Why does the world exist this way? How do the demons work? Why is there heaven? Why is there hell? How does God fit into the picture? All that sort of stuff just becomes interesting because they have to come up with dramatic reasons to the questions theologians have been wrestling with for millennia. And I enjoyed this one because this is a TV show that really asks a single question and then spends 4 seasons wrestling with that, which is, what is a good person and how do you become a good person? There's this great shot where Michael is explaining how the afterlife works and all of the point values pop up on the screen. And so you have maintain composure in line at a water park at Houston. You get positive 61.14 points. If you tell a woman to smile, that's negative 53.83 points, right? If you end slavery, that's 814 million points. If you commit genocide, that's negative 433,000 points. Anyway, this sort of idea that, if you do a good deed, you help a little lady across the street, that's positive points. If you yell at your kids, that's negative points. And you only go to the good place if you earn a certain number of good points. And that is a view of what it means to be a good person that I don't think any of we Latter-day Saints agree with. I think that might be even true in your particular branch of the Mormon tradition, Adam. So I wanted to just start off with, do we think that it's just a point system? And if not, what is it really that makes you a good person? And then I think this is going to then cascade into a discussion of some of the other points the show makes, because the point system seems to underlie all of it. Let's start at this time, I think, with you, Jacob. What are your thoughts on sort of the view of what it means to be a good person that The Good Place showcases in all 4 seasons and never seems to get away from?
At the risk of getting preachy and too doctrinal, Good Place inadvertently makes a compelling argument for the atonement. Just bear with me a second. Remember in season 4, they do finally make it to the actual good place. And what they found is no new people have come to the good place since 1516 or something like that. which is, the dawn of globalized trade and capitalism, because it turns out no matter what good deeds you did, because everyone is so completely entangled with all of the atrocities that come with globalized trade, that like if you buy flowers for your lover, that's normally like +5 points, but those flowers were harvested under the most appalling impoverished traditions in sub-Saharan Africa, so that's -10,000 points. And no matter what we try to do well, that like undermines everything else. When they're trying to figure out why they're all in the bad place in season 1, Chidi goes, I know why. It's because I like to enjoy almond milk, and I know how bad that is for the environment. And it's just the sense that we are all complicit. The clothing we're all wearing was sewn by third world children in sweatshops in the most appalling poverty. Our food is harvested by exploited third world, Mexican immigrant labor that we're constantly trying to deport and demonize. And the rubber on our tires comes from literal slave plantations in Malaysia and Africa, and the blood diamonds in our engagement rings, and go down the list. No matter how much we try to be good, we are all inherently complicit with the viciousness and cruelty of the world around us. What's going to wipe our ledgers clean? And that does argue that if you want to be a good person, one, you need to have access to something that is infinite and eternal. In that sense, I don't think it's just LDS people who disagree with the point system. I think that's foundational to Christianity just in general. Having said that, although our doctrine definitely disagrees, it's not a point system. It's by the grace of God alone that our sins can be infinitely wiped out. We sure still behave as though it's a point system, right? I've lived in Utah before. I got my master's degree at the U. I've attended BYU and BYU Idaho, and all of that is a very, very checklisty places to live. And there seems to be this assumption that if I can just keep the word of wisdom and the law of chastity and go to the temple regularly and dress modestly, and if I just hit all the rules, then I'm being a good person. And intellectually, the moment we all know that that's wrong and that's ridiculous, Elder Bednar gave a talk in conference about how the gospel's not a checklist, but that dude was also president of BYU Idaho, which might be the most checklisty place I've ever attended, which just shows how hard it is.
Even shorts are negative points there, right?
They got rid of it like a year ago. It was like only 1 or 2 years ago they finally got rid of the shorts ban. It was 7 months out of the year, that's not a big deal in Rexburg, but it does hit 100 in the summer.
Do they still not serve carbonated drinks at BYU Idaho?
I think they just allowed caffeine at BYU Idaho. It was like 5 years after BYU.
I wouldn't be surprised. I worked in the men's locker room when I was at Rexburg, like checking out lockers. And the start of every semester, I had to deal with a bunch of freshmen who came in their shorts because we had to check them out, shorts and T-shirts to work out in. But it was the rule that they had to be wearing pants on campus. So if they showed up in shorts, we couldn't check them out short. And it was just this Kafka-esque comedy because these 18-year-olds would very reasonably say, it doesn't make sense for me to have to wear shorts to get checked out shorts. And I'm just like, dude, it's just the rules, and I'll get fired if I don't enforce them. So just go back to your dorm and change into shorts. Like, it doesn't make sense. It's like, I know, we all know. Just go. I'm sorry. But on the same token, what do we actually believe? Moroni 7, if you have not charity, you're nothing, which of course is a direct endorsement of 1 Corinthians 13, which says the identical thing. If you have not charity, you're nothing. I would go so far as to argue that the overriding thesis of the Book of Mormon is if you don't have charity, you'll be genocidally wiped out. I think we know exactly what it means to be a good person, and I think part of the fun of the good place is it's parodying the checklist mentality that not just we in the LDS Church have, but that just most human beings seem to have in general. We all want to believe that if we just follow the checklist, we'll be fine. But, as Paul and Moroni said, if you don't have charity, then your checklist means nothing. And if you do have charity, your checklist still means nothing. I think it would be uncontroversial to say that we all disagree with the point system set up in the good place, but I think that was the point in the first place, that this whole checklist system is nonsensical and should be irrelevant to determining if you're a good person or not. Like, certainly the protagonist starts becoming a better person, it's because she's starting to actually care about what happens to her friends, not because she's moving up the point system.
Well, I was just going to say, this clearly implies that Doug Forsett should be going to BYU Idaho, right? He's the guy who's trying to gain the point system, and not necessarily because he is that kind of person, but just because he's aware that if I can get my points in the right balance, then I'm not tortured for eternity. So I'm going to do that.
Yes, he would have felt relief to attend BYU Idaho, perhaps the only student to ever do so.
None of us here speak for the church or any of its affiliates or the schools that we work for or teach at.
I'm an active member who pays tithing, by the way, so my money's still going to BYU Idaho, so I'm one to talk.
We love them.
I found it very similar to putting on my Old Testament failed PhD hat. I found it very similar to what we get in the Pentateuch and the Torah, for example. So you read the end of Deuteronomy, read the end of Leviticus. If you do these things, if you do enough of the things that'll bring you blessing, they'll outweigh the stuff that'll bring you curses. So I think it was a very much kind of an Old Testament, old Israelite mindset that's going on with the point system in The Good Place. And Michael, really, my favorite character, Ted Danson, he really challenges that. So at the beginning of season 3, he comes in and says, this whole point system, like Jacob said, this whole point system is flawed. And he reminded me to a large extent when he was making that argument, the attitude that the Apostle Paul takes towards the law in like Romans and Galatians. So really challenging this whole system of, if I do so many deeds, they'll counteract any of the bad deeds that I do. So I found it very much kind of Western religion, very much Judeo-Christian in that regard.
I hadn't really thought about that. The law, of course, Paul says, is our schoolmaster to bring us to Christ because it's to point forward to this Messiah figure who will come and perform the atonement and redeem all of mankind. But so many of the Old Testament people, and even the Christians of Paul's day and the Latter-day Saints of today, we're all still dealing with this sort of mindset of, I just got to make sure I have enough in my ledger. Then the atonement is efficacious for me. And Jesus and Paul and the modern prophets in the Book of Mormon, and like everybody's telling us, stop thinking that way. And we can't.
My tradition, we talk about, yes, we have our articles of faith where it says that salvation only comes through Christ, and this is what we believe. But we talk a lot about, and goes back to the title of my church, the Elijah Message Church. The full title is The Assured Way of the Lord. We talk a lot about keeping on the way. Well, what does that mean? Well, it's kind of like a point system going, doing all this stuff. We have kind of, to a much lesser extent, we're not supposed to drink or smoke all that often. We can do it from time to time, but we're not supposed to do it all that often. But it's these various little things that we're not supposed to do. And the things that we're supposed to do, tithe, etc., is understood as staying on the way, staying on the right path. And if you don't do that, well, you can fall out of favor.
And I think going back to Doug Forsett, it's really interesting that if we get too far down the points checklist mindset, it makes us miserable. It makes us do good things for bad reasons, right? We're doing good things because we're trying to avoid pain. And it doesn't turn you into a good person. He's a miserable, horrible person. He's not happy. I love that episode where they finally see him and they point out the difference between accumulating points by doing things that are externally good and he's living off the grid and filtering his own water and growing all his own crops to avoid being entangled in all this stuff. But he is unhappy. He is miserable. And that's not the way it's supposed to be, right? When we finally have everyone figuring out how to become a better person in season 4, when they change the system to allow for eternal progression, basically, to allow people to continue to grow after this life and become better people, it makes them happier, which is really interesting because those first 3 seasons, you feel like this dismal view about happiness. And then we finally get to this, being good does make you happy if you do it the right way.
I love that you mentioned the misery part, Liz, because it reminds me of this folk tale. It's from the Jewish tradition, and this rabbi goes to heaven. And he tells God all of these things that he's done. He's followed the oral law. He's followed the written law perfectly. He's done everything in the Talmud, the Mishnah, etc. And God says, hey, did you enjoy life? Did you make out with a girl? Did you go on a vacation? Did you enjoy life? And the rabbi says, well, no, because he wasn't even thinking about that. And God sends him to hell because in his striving for this system, he negated the most important commandment that God had, which was to be joyful. So, and that goes back to our tradition. You read the Book of Mormon, you read the Pearl of Great Price. Adam fell so that men might have joy. Eve says in the Pearl of Great Price in the Book of Moses, we would never know the joy of having seed. So that joy component is lost in this emphasis on the system and on gaining these points.
I found it really interesting, Jacob, that you brought up a verse from Moroni chapter 7, because the two sort of verses that came to my mind as I was thinking through some of these philosophical issues are also from Moroni chapter 7. So everybody listening to the podcast, there's your assignment. Go put Moroni chapter 7 in dialogue with the good place, I guess, because to me, there's also this question in the show about if you know there's a point system and then you start to game it, you are now doing things for the wrong reason. And all your positive points start accruing negatively towards you because you're not doing it for the right reason, which reminds me a great deal about verse 8, talking about a man giving a gift grudgingly. It counted as evil towards him. And then sort of this point that Adam was making, it's about following the way. It's about just being a good person. And a good person is not the kind of being who sits there constantly looking at the calculation of his ledger and his tally and writing things in the left-hand column that are negative and writing things in the right-hand column and always just really worried about the salvation of his soul. A good person, to switch traditions a little bit, is just more Taoist about it, like just flowing in the current of being a good person, which is, my favorite verse in the entire Book of Mormon is verse 48 of Moroni chapter 7, where Mormon says, "Pray to the Father that you will be filled with this charity, this love, that you may become the sons of God, that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is." And I just love that idea that you only recognize Christ inasmuch as you yourself are a mirror for him. And I don't get the impression from any of the Gospels or his time in 3rd Nephi with the Nephites or whatever, that he's worried about his ledger. And it's not just because he's a perfect being by definition. He could have given flowers to his mother. It's just a mindset that is entirely foreign to this kind of point system that we all feel that we have to naturally fall into.
The summer after I graduated from BYU, Idaho, I got roped into one of those summer sales jobs. I hated it. It's the worst job I've ever had. It was security systems is what we were doing in the late 2000s. I was the technician. I was the one who did the actual installs, but I was still complicit because the sales rep would tell flagrant lies to make a sale. So it's like, okay, I had to tell them this motion sensor can read through walls. If they ask and you tell them it does that, it's like, no, this is crappy equipment. What are you talking about? Gosh, one of my coworkers was not LDS. He was just this high school dropout biker dude with a goatee and tattoos and smoked and drank, and I was kind of scared of him the first time I met him, but we became best friends. We were each other's favorite coworker. We helped each other on installs all the time, and he was the most honest man in that company. So, like, he would get called to an install of someone who was, like, legally blind and in early dementia, and he just stopped doing the install halfway through because he was like, this is wrong. I can't do this. And, someone else was, like, completely deaf, so would not be able to hear the system if it went off. And they communicated through, like, Post-it notes because he didn't know sign language. And they also just said, ma'am, I'm sorry, I can't do this install. This is wrong. He didn't have anything philosophical or theological about it. He just had a basic sense of right and wrong. Anyways, middle of that summer, we hit some arbitrary sales goals. So we all got treated out to dinner at a nice restaurant. And we're sitting down there, and my buddy, the biker dude, orders a beer. Just, that's what he does when he's out. And most of our sales reps were LDS. They were from BYU or Utah State. And the sales rep who had tried to sell to the legally blind lady in dementia sat next to him and looked at him and said, "You're not going to drink that beer, are you?" And, biker dude just kind of looks at him like, "No, I was going to stare at it." And he just kind of gets up and leaves because, we're used to talking about religious hypocrisy as being something subtle or unconscious. And here it was just beating you over the head obvious. And at least for me, it was a clear moment of this is what happens when you get locked into the point system, because this sales rep was very clean cut, short haircut, clean shaven, followed the BYU honor code to a T, paid tithing on all of his sales commissions, went to church every Sunday morning. And what did it matter? He was a dishonest salesman. And this dude who did not follow the word of wisdom, did not follow the BYU honor code, was much more honest. And for young college-aged me, that was a very clarifying moment of what you give yourself psychological permission to get away with if you start embracing this points system in general, if that makes sense. I fully agree to everyone who said you're miserable when you live life as though it's a point system. But it's not just that you're miserable and doing the right thing for the wrong reasons. You're also doing the wrong thing for the wrong reasons too, and you're giving yourself psychological permission to do so.
I feel like there's a quote from Brigham Young who talks about, and I'd have to go dig it up, and maybe it's not Brigham Young, maybe it's J. Golden Kimball or someone, I don't know. Whoever said it, the principle is true. Like, the Lord is more pleased with the guy who smokes and drinks and swears at his mule and all that stuff, but is kind and generous and helpful to his neighbors and brings them flour when they're out and things like that, as opposed to the smooth-talking guy who's always at church on Sunday but treats his neighbors like dirt.
I think you are quoting Brigham Young, but there's also one from Joseph Smith where he says, I love that man better who swears as long as his arm, but is honest in his dealings with his fellow man than the long, smooth-faced hypocrite.
Yeah, that's the one I was looking for, yeah.
Or movie Savage Journey, which is a super cheesy movie from the 1980s about Brigham Young and Joseph Smith, and they're hopping through the fields. Joseph Smith gives that exact quote.
Nice.
Okay.
There you go.
I'll have to watch it now. Cheesiness and all. I'm also just reminded of, like, one of Hugh Nibley's lines is the worst part about being in hell is being comfortable there. And, you know, and that also plays out in season 1. Remember when Adam Scott's demon is talking and tells Eleanor, it's like, listen, you're going to be happier with us. We're definitely going to torture you, but you'll be happier there than you are here. And she just kind of takes a shot in a tacit agreement. And that's also a line from the Book of Mormon, right? You'd be more miserable to dwell in the presence of a just God with full knowledge of your sins than you would with the damned souls of hell. And that's another way that there's kind of this LDS resonance with the good place, right?
And I'm also thinking in relationship to that, one of the episodes I rewatched for this was the burrito episode, which is when they first meet Jen, the judge of the universe, played very hilariously by Maya Rudolph. And she gives them each an individual test to determine whether they're going to go to the good place. And Eleanor's the only one who passes because she refuses to take advantage of the others and just look out for number one, right? And then when the judge is sitting them down and telling them all they've made this pact that if any of them don't pass, they're all going to go to hell together. She's like, only Eleanor passes. And Eleanor interrupts her and is like, oh, none of us passed. Very sad. And I think that's the turning point for Eleanor's character in this series is when she's willing to give up her own comfort because she would rather be with these people. I'm thinking another Joseph Smith quote, like, if the Latter-day Saints go to hell, they'll turn the demons out and turn it into a heaven. Like, Eleanor would be happier in the bad place with her friends because she cares about them that much. And that's kind of another thing that's interesting about the last season is it becomes almost a universal salvation thing, right? That we can't be happy with anyone in the bad place. We shouldn't be okay with that. We should all work until everyone gets to the good place.
Which is section 128, right? For we without them cannot be made perfect, neither can they without us be made perfect. Like, again, I'm jumping a lot of traditions in this conversation today, but that feels like we are all called to be bodhisattvas, which in Buddhism are the people who have escaped the cycle of birth and rebirth, but choose not to leave so they can stick around and help other people on their progression to enlightenment, which is very fourth season of The Good Place, where we as humanity are going to stick around and help everybody else advance and become to the point where they can enter the good place legitimately. And then literally, once you're done with that, you can stop being a bodhisattva and go through the archway and disappear and go back into the universe. And, you know, the drop returns to the ocean, as Chidi talks about. But that idea that, like, it, you know, Augustine was like, is part of the joy of the saints is to watch the damned burning in hell. And I'm like, no, that's a terrible way of viewing the, like, everybody should be willing to help and stick around and help other people advance. The Lord weeps over the third of the hosts of heaven who fell. And so the fourth season gets very interesting and with LDS residences in that way, depending on whether or not you believe in progression between the kingdoms, which is sort of an unsettled part of LDS theology. Different apostles and prophets have come down on different sides of that. Different thinkers have weighed in on it. It very much moves into everybody gets a fair shot forever until you make it. But that idea, we without them can't be made perfect. Does that mean all of them? Because that means we all have to be bodhisattvas until every last member of the human race is saved. If we're going to read that phrase from section 128 that way, then nobody gets to go to the good place until we can all join hands and go over the threshold together. And I find that to be a deeply interesting thought.
I really like that you quoted the section on the baptism of the dead, because I feel like in the character progression in the show, Eleanor, Chidi, and all of them, they become baptizers for the dead. Now, we don't have that ordinance in my church, but they're the ones who help people, basically everyone at the end of that season 4 to eternally progress and move on. I think you hit the nail on the head, Carl. They could become kind of like savior figures themselves, whereas when they started off, they were hot messes.
Everybody starts off as a hot mess and everybody can be a savior figure in the end. I think that resonates well with Latter-day Saint theology.
For me, the main theme of The Good Place was progression. Maybe we picked up on it more because we come from Latter-day Saint traditions, but from the very offset, kind of even progression in the afterlife, which is something I think that's unique to the Restoration. Other traditions, I was raised Baptist, Lutheran, they don't have that. When you're dead, you're dead. But in The Good Place, on the TV show, there's this possibility that you can be better than you are even after death.
If you'd like to know more about that, you can read my dissertation, which is literally on this topic. Jacob Rulis, what do you think about progression and they without us cannot be made perfect? I love that line where, I think it's in the season 3 towards the end, where Chidi writes the note to himself that says, there is no answer, but Eleanor is the answer. And I feel like that's also very Latter-day Saint. Like, there isn't one way to be good, but if you're only in the service of your fellow beings, you're only in the service of your God, right? If you've done it unto at least these my brethren, you've done it unto me. Like, that's the answer. Just in his case, instantiated into the one single person of Eleanor.
This is one of the points that I loved about the essay that was on Ships of Hagoth, was pointing out that sometimes in the Restoration we forget what a radical idea this is, that people can continue to progress after they die, right? There's so much anxiety in most Christian sects about this deadline of death. And this idea of eternal progression is radical in how it frees us from feeling worried about empty chairs in heaven. We don't have to worry about that because we do believe people can continue to grow and change. And there's this continual thread in The Good Place of, but look at how much improvement she's made. She's still a crappy person, but she's getting better. And she's getting a little better and a little better. And just the hope that we should have in progression and change rather than worry about some kind of deadline. And that's so freeing.
Roman Catholics are like, no, this deadline is important for human freedom. To be able to have a point, you got to choose, and you have a deadline to do it. And that's important to them, which I also find compelling.
I mean, on one hand, there is an inherent tension in our doctrine because in the Book of Mormon, it says, procrastinate not the day of your repentance, implying there is a hard, fast deadline, and things will be definitely worse for you if you don't repent now. The whole eternal progression after you die isn't supposed to let you off the hook. But I do agree with Liz, probably because you were agreeing with me from 3 years ago. It's freeing. It's like, oh, I do need to repent. I do need to work on becoming a better human being. But death is not the end. And isn't that what all religions in some way, shape, or form are trying to reassure us of? Death is the one unalterable fact, the one thing that terrifies us uniformly and unites us all. And we need that comfort, and it can't be cold comfort. There needs to be something that comes next. So it's just to know that what we did here wasn't a waste. And in fact, that's actually where the LDS connections to The Good Place falter for me, right at the finish line, because The Good Place's portrayal of eternal progression, but as you see in the series finale, they hit a wall. It becomes much more Buddhist, as you point out, Carl, very Hindu. The idea you return to the Brahma Atman, the drop returns to the ocean. There's a failure to pull the trigger there because, you mentioned in your notes, Liz, that what's her face, British heiress.
Nahani.
Yeah, she decides to become an architect like Michael is. And it's like, oh, cool, she's moving on to creating world. But again, they don't quite finish the thought. Like, is our eternal destiny to become designers of good places? Or is it to become designers of entire universes and bringing a whole other host of spirit children into godhood as well? That was the most radical idea of all that Joseph Smith introduced only 3 months before he was killed. And the King Follett discourse remains heavily debated and controversial even within the Utah LDS tradition because it is so radical. And that's one of those moments where I think we need to give Joseph Smith at least a little credit on the King Follett discourse because that was so radical that no one else ever seems to finish the thought. It's like when The Good Place doesn't show them progressing to godhood themselves, I don't think they're doing that out of a deference to their Christian viewership. I think the idea just honestly never occurred to the script writers. I think they just went with the Buddhist ending because they honestly couldn't think of anything else to do with the rest of eternity. They're tacitly agreeing with the atheists who say, wouldn't you get bored if you lived forever? And at least with the last innovations Joseph Smith was making to LDS theology at the end of his life, he was arguing that you don't get bored in eternity because you never run out of things to do because your final destiny is to become a god yourself, which again is controversial even within the Utah LDS tradition. But that for me is the most radical idea of it all. And the fact that such a smartly written show like The Good Place didn't have that thought either betrays just how radical that thought is to begin with.
Maybe. I'm going to push back a little bit on that. Maybe, Adam, you know the answer if you listen to the podcast about The Good Place. Why is there no God figure in this universe, right? That is, to me, a glaring theological problem. Like, where does all of this come from? Who created the system in the first place? It's not actually the judge. She's just sort of there doing her job. Other TV shows where there are angels and demons and heaven and hell and God and whatever, find some way to explain why God doesn't just snap his fingers and wipe all evil out of existence, right? They find some dramatic way to solve the problem of evil. This one avoids the whole problem by just avoiding God entirely. So within the structure of the show itself, because they wanted to avoid that issue for whatever reason, there isn't the possibility of a God figure anyway, because there already would be one. I don't know that it's their philosophical failings. I'm open to the possibility that it's their dramatic failings, because they just didn't want to deal with the God figure and so left that sort of entire conversation out of the scripts, and so it's completely absent from the show from beginning to end.
If I recall, it was a deliberate choice so as to not offend viewer sensibilities. So there was a deliberate choice not to make reference to a God figure explicitly. The Good Place is a comedy. They didn't want to necessarily offend viewers with religious sensibilities. I think that's kind of a flaw there. I mean, other shows did this too originally. So if you remember Supernatural, which is one of my wife's favorite shows, she's always oohing and eyeing over Sam and Dean, but they didn't reference God to the last like 5 seasons or something like that. And then they turned God into this massive kind of like in His Dark Materials where he's just a jerk. And like just they have to kill God. So I don't think they wanted to just don't think they wanted to go there at all. And if I recall from the podcast, that was the reason.
Well, if you are going to do it, just have Morgan Freeman play him like he does in the what's that series?
Bruce Almighty?
Nobody can hate Morgan Freeman.
Right? I feel like there had to have been some way you could have done it without offending people, but they made their choice. And I wonder if their discussion of what the afterlife is like is thus hindered because they made this like business choice then, if Adam's recollection is correct.
The other thing that I think prevents them from getting there is a limited conception of what the good place is, right? We tend to make fun of the like traditional idea, oh, we'll all be in white robes playing harps. We all started out with Mark Twain making fun of this, and no one believes that anymore. But they basically updated that picture for a modern audience, been like, oh, the good place is a place where you get to pursue all the hobbies you didn't get to have on Earth, and you can go out to fancy dinners and travel the world and party. And it's a very like young adult 20s picture of what heaven is, right? I was struck again that there are 0 children in this show. We have Tahani being a child to her parents, right? And her parents becoming better people, but like no one is like progressing by having a family and like forming more relationships with other people. And I guess that's a concept they didn't consider that could be part of the Good Place, which is definitely part of Mormon Good Place, right?
Going back to what Jacob mentioned earlier, kind of in relation to that, it seemed to me very much like a Swedenborgian heaven. If you ever read Heaven and Hell, heaven is just, and I love Swedenborg, but Swedenborg's heaven, if you read Heaven and Hell, you're basically doing the same thing that you did while you were alive. It's just in the afterlife. But so like me being here in this library, it will be the same when I die. I'm basically doing the same thing, but on kind of more exalted level. I have even more fun doing it. So I felt that there was a lot of at least Swedenborgian themes and influences on the show in that regard.
It's interesting that their version of heaven is what we believe the telestial kingdom is, the lowest of the 3. It's like a perfected earth, and it's just going to get exponentially when you go from like the starlight of the telestial to the moonlight of the terrestrial to the sun noonday of the celestial. Like, eye hath not seen, neither hath ear heard, nor has entered into the heart of man, right? The glory is that await for those who accept the atonement and are made perfect in Christ. And so all they can think of is just like a perfect earth. And we're like, no, that's as low as you get in our three-tiered LDS afterlife. Unfortunately, we went a little too long, and Jacob had to go be a good dad, so we're not going to have him here for our last segment. But let's jump to our rating segment now, where we're going to go through our sort of 3 different rubrics of analyzing and talking about the movie or TV show we're going through. On the first one, we rate on clean versus objectionable material, celestial, terrestrial, telestial, outer darkness. I'll be very curious actually to see where people end up on this one. Adam, why don't we have you go first? Where would you rate this one in the multi-tiered Latter-day Saint afterlife?
I think it's definitely telestial. Like Liz said, there was a lot of sexual innuendo and a lot of more sex jokes than I remember there being. So I don't know if it's wholly appropriate. Like I said, I probably wouldn't show it to my 9-year-old, maybe my 12-year-old. But there's also, ironically, a kind of a wholesome feel to it. So it's not totally outer darkness, but I wouldn't put it as terrestrial celestial.
I mean, I feel the same way. It's one of those things where it's like they made adult comedy, and adult comedy means we have to have sex jokes. But I really wish I could show this to my teenagers, and I just don't feel comfortable sitting in the same room while we watch those yet. So it's like, I wish I could show it to them. I need a clear play version of this. Like, where's my Angel Studios filter? Anyway, I would go with telestial as well. It's just very crude.
I think I was going to go the same. To me, as far as objectionable material, I do remember the one episode, as somebody who majored in philosophy in his undergrad, was my favorite episode was the one where they're doing like a live version of the trolley problem, but it is actually running over people and with all the attendant PG-13 level gore, but the violence is heavily implied, and it's quite funny to see Chidi react. Anyway, it bumps it down to telestial for me, I think, as well. So I think we have a consensus on that. Let's move on to our next rating, artistic merit for skillful, effective use of craft, 1 to 5 popcorn balls. I'll go first on this one. I think it's a 4. It's adult comedy going in. Just be aware that this is an adult comedy show, but it certainly gets people thinking. I've seen lots of people in our tradition and a lot of my friends from other traditions talk a lot about this show, and it just created a lot of really good, interesting discussions about the various philosophical and ethical issues that brings up, and it does so in a way that was fun and hilarious. And I kind of want to ask, like, where were you when you found this thing out? What was your reaction when you found out that at the end of season 1, they'd been in the bad place this whole time? Because the TV show was called The Good Place. And so even the title itself is like trying to lead you to not understand what's actually going on. It's great. I think the acting is fun. Everybody plays really well. The guy who plays Jason is amazing. And I say this not actually because of his work here in The Good Place, but because he plays the Sith Lord apprentice in The Acolyte. And I did not realize that was him until like I had finished the entire show. And I was like, that's Jason from The Good Place? It's like running around with the lightsaber, just carving through armies of Jedi single-handedly. I'm like, wow. And so I thought everybody just knocked it out of the park. They're fun. It's humorous in the right ways. The time is a Jeremy Bearimy. Just little absurd little things like that. It makes it fun to watch. So I'm going to give it, I think, 4 popcorn balls. It does pretty good. I don't give it 5 just because I think they shied away from some of the big questions about the nature of life, the universe, and everything at the end. And even if they just put Morgan Freeman in there for a few minutes at the end or something, just like applauding and saying, good job, guys, you figured it out. And so 4 popcorn balls for me. Liz, let's have you go next. What do you rate it as?
I mean, I'm going to give it 5 just because I think the dialogue, when it's not being crude, is very snappy. The jokes always land. One of the last episodes I had a chance to rewatch was the episode in season 3 called Janet, and where Darcy is playing every character in the series, and you can tell absolutely who they are because they've all turned into Janets. And so, but you can tell which Janet is Chidi Janet and which one is Jason Janet. And it's just so fun with its artistic choices and so playful. And innovative in the way that it's chosen to do this. And I just absolutely love it. It's given me analogies that I reference all the time, like the point system. It's just become a cultural touchstone, I think, and will stay that way. So I would say it's a great piece of media.
I want to ask, actually, and maybe this should have been brought up in the clean versus objectionable material one. What about the faux swearing? Like the mother forking shirt balls and stuff like that.
Oh, swear.
Like, maybe, again,
Oh,
not a
man.
reason to watch it with your kids because they're like, what's she supposed to be saying?
No, but in Jana Reese's review of the series, after only 2 seasons had been out, she's like, one of the reasons Mormons should watch the series is if you're tired of getting all of your fake swear words from Napoleon Dynamite, this is going to give you a whole new bunch of fake swear words to use. Hooray!
That's funny. Adam, what do you think? Artistic merit, 1 to 5 popcorn balls.
I would say 4. This show had a lot of the feel of shows like The Office and SNL, and had some of the same cast, like with the judge and with the angel, but I felt like it was much more profound, as I guess it intended to be. One of the things I really like, this is going to be my own little pet peeve, but I love when people try to recreate heaven on screen. So one of my favorite films is by Albert Brooks called Defending Your Life, and he recreates heaven kind of as this really nice retirement community. And so in the first season of The Good Place, I know it's not actually The Good Place, but the heaven that Kristen Bell is in, that Eleanor is in, I actually kind of liked it at first. It seems like a nice little Disneyland or something like that. So on an artistic level, like the production design and stuff, I think really facilitated this as being kind of a trickster place that looks really, really fun at first until you find out what it really is. So I would give it a 4.
And our final rating is Gospel Connections, morally edifying messages, 1 to 5 apricot. Liz, why don't we have you do this one first? What are your thoughts?
I mean, again, like when we did K-pop Demon Hunters, I said, what show can you use to talk to your kids about idol worship? What other show can you use to talk to your kids about, like, Kantian philosophy and what we owe each other, and like introduce them to all of these thinkers that then hopefully someday they will read in college? So I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff there in a society that doesn't tend to talk about philosophy a lot unless you run in certain circles, which we do. But not everyone is interested in these things. And so the fact that they can bring that to a popular comedy sitcom and have people be like, oh yeah, the trolley problem. Let's talk about the nuances of the trolley problem. I love that. I love the reworking of the point system and the talking about redemption and growth for people. And especially when Tahani's parents get redeemed, I think that's pretty amazing because often parents get the short straw in media. They're always the people who ruin their kids and have to admit they're wrong. And this isn't a change from that, but they really do become good people and realize they've made mistakes. And that reunion when they have changed is amazing. I probably am going to give it 5. It's a real conversation starter. You can go a lot of fun places.
I'd forgotten until I was sort of re-reviewing it for this podcast episode about that sort of plot line about Tahani's parents. And it is just a gorgeously wonderful little payoff at the end when they are all able to reunite, all forgiving each other for the sins they had committed against each other and all the toxicness that the parents had created, that the girls had responded to in kind. It's a small subplot, but it's one that I felt was really meaningful because I hope that happens to basically everybody. Like, no matter what you did to each other here on earth, I hope through the grace of Christ, we're all able to come to a moment of forgiveness and reconciliation with everybody. And that was a great way of showcasing that really well. I'll go next on this one. I'm going to give it a 4 just because longtime listeners to the podcast will know if there's not an explicit reference to Christ or the gospel, which there is not. I'm not going to give it a 5, but in all the other ways, I just agree with everything Liz said. So that's all I have on that. Adam, bring us home. Give us your rating on 1 to 5 apricots.
I'm definitely going to give it a 5. I haven't watched the show in years, but it's been something that's been on my mind ever since I first started watching episodes of it. So its themes and kind of its theology, even though it wouldn't say that, have stuck with me over the years. And I really love the overarching theme, at least in my opinion, of progression. Kind of how you can progress in this life, you can become a better person, but that continues on in the afterlife as well. I think that's a really important theme. And this show nails it right on the head. So I'm going to give it a 5.
That's a theme that resonates very well with Latter-day Saints. Even if there's debate about whether it's eternal possible progression or if there is a deadline, But we all agree the deadline's not in this life, and that is a uniquely Latter-day doctrine. So, yeah. All right. You can find me and follow me on Threads at Carl Cranney. Liz, where can people get in touch with you if they want to?
You can follow my writing and book reviews at lizbusby.com, or I'm also on lizbusby.substack.com.
And Adam, do you have any social media you'd like to plug?
So I have my own Facebook page. You're welcome to friend me. I also have an Instagram page, Adam the Giant Guy. I also have reviews on Great Crawford Books. If you ever want to look at their website, I have reviews on multiple LDS books, theology, literature, etc. on their page.
Who knew when we first met all those years ago and you were a Baptist that we'd end up being Latter-day Saint buddies?
Who knew? Who knew?
What a ride.
That's what happens when you count the Book of Mormon on your own. Yes, yeah.
I'll do a pitch for Jacob. You should be following Ships of Hagoth. It is a really fun blog. He does these fun readings of songs where he'll put the lyrics and then there are footnotes doing LDS interpretations of all the lyrics of the songs. And he also has a great memoir-ish creative book called And All Eternity Shook, which is about when his mom was sick with cancer while he was on his mission. And it's excellent. I think I've pitched it as my best book before on this podcast. It's worth reading.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us this week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with a friend who enjoys good movies and good conversation. You can also subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice or on YouTube. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this episode via email, social media, on our website. It really makes our day as podcast hosts to hear from our listeners. Liz, can you tell us what we will be discussing in our next episode?
In our next main episode, we're going to be discussing Cinderella adaptations. Why are we so enthralled with this particular fairy tale that we keep remaking it? And how does this story connect to eternal truths? We've got some really fun guests scheduled to come talk to us, so be ready for that conversation next time. Watch a Cinderella movie of your choice.
I mentioned that to Susan, and she sent me an email that had like 15 of them. So we might have to get her on for just a second because Cinderella's her jam. But it will be our jam next time as well. This has been Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, encouraging you to seek after everything virtuous, lovely, of good report, or praiseworthy. See you next time.